I'd like to start today with a question. How can you tell that someone has died? What are the signs that someone has died? Actually, you would check their pulse, check their heart, right? And if the person does not have a heartbeat, doesn't have a pulse, then, and maybe we try CPR if we think that would help. But once a person doesn't have a heartbeat, we say that they have died. Well, the converse is also true, right? If someone does have a heartbeat, they are alive. It's pretty obvious. Well, in the state of Texas, that actually became law this week. It's called the Texas Heartbeat Act. It recognizes the heartbeat of a child in his or her mother's womb as a sign of human life. So once a child in its mother's womb, the heartbeat is detectable through ultrasound, which is about 6 weeks usually into the pregnancy. If there is an abortion, those supporting the abortion can be sued. And any member of the public can sue abortion providers, staff members, taxi drivers, anyone who assists in an abortion and profits from it. They can be sued for a minimum of $10,000. So this bill effectively, or de facto, creates a ban on abortion in Texas. Now, it was signed into law on May 19th, and it became law on September 1st of this week. And because the Supreme Court declined to hear a challenge to this act. So this is a pivotal moment in the history of Texas regarding abortion and in the United States, because abortion is effectively outlawed. So for almost 48 years, since 1973 in Roe versus Wade, people have been advocating for an end to abortion. But Roe v. Wade prevented states from outlawing it in their country, or in their states. So since 1973, abortion rates increased, and it got to the point where it was almost 30% of a generation of children to be born in a year did not make it to birth because of abortion. So those who are born after Roe versus Wade, if you're one of those, you're a survivor. Here's a way to think about it. If I grew up in a class where there was about 25 kids in the classroom, statistically speaking, there should have been another 10 kids that would have been there if it hadn't been for abortion. So I recognize that this is a difficult subject. It's a little sensitive. It can be controversial. But the Heartbeat Act is great news. It's good for women, great for women, it's great for children, and it's great for our state. Great for everyone here. This heartbeat law simply invites all people to recognize the humanity of the small, vulnerable child in her mother's womb. The Heartbeat Act requires that we all recognize something that is blatantly obvious to most human beings. That the child, when a woman that is pregnant with a child and who has a heartbeat, that child is alive. And that while the woman definitely has a huge burden of raising the child, she is not alone. We are here to help. So that child deserves a chance to live. I would like to talk a little bit about this in relationship to the readings today. So to say that this is good for women. If you watched the news this week, that was not the prevailing sentiment in the news, right? There was all kinds of things that were said about how this is bad for women. Now, I talked to Abby Johnson. You may know Abby Johnson. She wrote a book about her experience of leaving Planned Parenthood. She was the director of the clinic here in Bryan College Station. And then finally her eyes were opened and she saw the reality of what was happening there, and she walked out. She experienced the mercy of God in walking out, and actually then became Catholic, and now has 7 children, or 8 children, I think. I can't keep up. But so Abby now is a pro-life advocate who speaks all over the United States, and her book was made into a movie. I'm drawing a blank. What is the name of that? Unplanned, yes, thank you. Unplanned. So if you haven't seen that movie or read that book, I highly recommend that. Abby she helps women and men who are working in the abortion industry to come out and to leave their jobs there and to find jobs in other places. Her nonprofit is called And Then There Were None. I talked to her and asked her, like, how have you been talking in the media about this? Because obviously it is controversial. And she said, look, Father Brian, this is good for women. I've talked to thousands, if not tens of thousands of women who regret their abortion. I've not talked to a single woman, even who's had like rape or things like that, who has said they wish they hadn't kept their child. So to hear that clearly, this is good for women, that they get to keep their child, that they, with this bill, get to recognize and have the support for recognizing the reality of the child growing in their womb, that child has a heartbeat, that the child is alive. So she now has support for raising her child, and she knows she's not alone. And before talking about how we can help with that and how we do in response to the scriptures, I just like to emphasize that this is about mercy. It's not about judgment and shaming people, right? Many people in the last almost 50 years have been touched by abortion. That's just the reality. And many people suffer alone with secrets in how they had an abortion or supported one. But it doesn't have to be that way. The suffering in silence. We need to come to Jesus. Jesus is the one who is the healer, right? We see in the Gospels, like today, with Jesus healing this man who is deaf and who has a speech impediment. That's what Jesus does. He heals those who come to him. So anyone that is participated and has this sort of a secret, come to confession. Go to Jesus in prayer. Come receive his healing. Like Abby, don't suffer in silence, but come and receive Jesus, his love and mercy, so that you can be alive, not full of shame. Jesus conquered sin. He wants to conquer shame and guilt through his mercy. So this Heartbeat Act is good for women. It's also good for children. First of all, it's good for children because they get to live. I mean, that's the blatantly obvious part of it, right? But it's also good for their families. It's good for their life. There's a commitment as part of this bill to help moms and children with the assistance they need. So it doesn't say you have to keep your child and good luck. Rather, there's $100 million set aside by the state to help women who need basic things like car seats, clothing, diapers, formula, help with daycare expenses, housing, counseling, life skills classes. All of those things are provided for, including women and for children, WIC, you may be familiar with that, or Medicaid. So there's lots of help that's set aside for women who have an unexpected pregnancy. And I want to say that I'm very proud of Catholics who over the last almost 50 years have really stepped it up. If you look at the pregnancy resource centers and the organizations that help women who are in need to keep their children, it's largely done by Catholics. Here in town, we have the Elizabeth House. The founders of that are primarily from this parish and a few other Catholic women from around town. They've expanded the board a little bit, but it's a resource center so that women who are in a crisis pregnancy need a safe place to go, need a place where they can get life skills, the financial help assistance they need. They can go there. They can have up to 6 women at a time. So that was founded by Catholics. That's what we do. We help those who are in need. There's also the Gabriel Project, which we do through Catholic relief or Catholic charities locally. Gabriel Projects gives out diapers, they have classes, they have food, whatever. They have all the things that a mom could need, car seats, all of those things. There's also a Hope Pregnancy Resource Center here in town. I just encourage you, if you've never supported or even learned about these organizations, to do so. There's a lot that we can do and that we need to do to help women and families who have been open to life, They'll receive the gift of a child. So related then to the readings in the gospel, or in the second reading from James, he is very specific about helping those who are poor, right? He says, show no partiality as you adhere to your faith and our glorious Lord Jesus Christ. For if a man with gold rings and fine clothes comes into your assembly and you greet him, but somebody comes in who is poor and dressed shabbily, and you tell them, sit over there or sit at my feet, saying, you're showing partiality. And that's a normal human tendency, right? We want to go and talk to the celebrity, the person that has it all together. But somebody that looks a little odd, is a little off, maybe who isn't dressed the way that we think that they ought to, we would want to kind of push them aside. That's not what we're supposed to do. Listen, my beloved brothers and sisters, he writes, did not God choose those who are poor in the world to be rich in faith and heirs to the kingdom that he promised to those who love him? The poor, rich in faith, heirs to the kingdom. So showing partiality by not reaching out and caring for the poor, that is not what we are called to do as followers of Jesus. And who are the poor? About 1/3 of single-parent households live in poverty. That is the highest rate of all demographics in the United States. So who are the poor? It's single parents with children. Jesus goes to help those who are the most vulnerable. He heals the deaf man in the gospel today. And the first reading from Isaiah, it's talking about when God will be the vindicator through the Messiah that will come. And he's bringing vindication and healing for who? It's not the wealthy. It's those who are blind and deaf and lame and mute, those who are in need. This is what Jesus then fulfills. And the disciples of Jesus do the same. We go to help those who are poor and who are in need. I want to say a little bit about raising children. It's not easy, right? It is it's the costliest investment that any society makes to raise the next generation, right? So the way that we educate, the way that we raise, the way that we are open to life as a society, if we invest in the next generation, we have a culture of life. But if we are a selfish society that does not invest in the next generation, that is not open to children, does not welcome them, but rather seeks to enjoy the benefits earned by the previous generation without passing them along, that is culture and wealth especially, then we are a culture of death. A selfish society that seeks luxury, not charity, is a culture of death. A society that seeks affluence rather than generosity is a culture of death. So I invite you to consider, in what way do you think about our culture? Would you rather participate in a culture of life or a culture of death? And how do you live? We are called to give support and encouragement to families with children, either through these pregnancy resource centers or just the way that you support families with children. When's the last time you went up to a family with multiple children and said, hey, you have a beautiful family? Or thank you for bringing your children here. They look so good. Even if they're a little crying and stuff like that, just say, hey, it's okay. But how do you encourage families with children? They are the ones who have the largest burden of raising the next generation, and they need our support. If we give them support, we're participating in a culture of life. If we begrudge families with children, we are living in a culture of death. So, my brothers and sisters, this Texas heartbeat law is something that is good for women, it's good for children, it's good for our society, it's good for Texas. It effectively ends abortion in Texas, but it will not create a culture of life unless our hearts are changed. I'm going to say that again. The Texas Heartbeat Bill effectively ends abortion in Texas, but it won't create a culture of life unless our hearts are changed.